Hey there, hi. How you doing? I hope you're doing good. Your faithful friend here once again, Marvin Mukanaka. And I trust that as we keep talking, you're also becoming faithful friends. Thank you for your faithfulness in sending in comments and liking and sharing and also subscribing. If you haven't subscribed as per tradition, I encourage you to please subscribe. We're building up something very, very interesting, something fascinating here. All right, today's topic of discussion, very, very interesting. We're talking about the milk and honey that was in the promised land. So we're basically talking about the promised land, but we're going to look at maps this time around. Just look at the map of Israel and then just compare with other maps and just kind of think through certain things. One of the things that has been lacking for a long time, especially among believers, is common sense. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I want to quickly get into this. So, the promised land. We were told, or our forefathers were told, that this is the land of milk and honey. Not only milk and honey, not only milk and honey, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. So, let's get into some of the interesting aspects that we've ignored in the past. First of all, look at the map and then start to think through about what it really meant that this was a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, traditionally, and I've said this, that the church, I think, has made a mistake by spiritualizing everything, where we treat every aspect of our lives as a spiritual thing. So the promised land now is a spiritual thing. Milk is a spiritual thing. Honey is a spiritual thing. So we're not able to really actualize, all right, actualize our dreams or our hopes or our thoughts or things like that, because everything is just being spiritual. And I said before, at least in one of the videos I've done previously, I've said that I believe that the promised land is a physical entity. It's real estate. And God wants that to be inherited corporately, not individually. You can't inherit the promised land as an individual. It's a corporate assignment. And I want to get into a little bit of that by looking at just a few facts, a few details here that we need to assess together. So first off, let's start by looking at the maps, some maps, all right? Now, some maps that you will see, for example, this map right here shows you that the Ethiopia, okay? Because this is to deal with the question of when the Bible talks about Ethiopia, for example, Moses married a woman from Ethiopia or an Ethiopian woman. Which Ethiopia are we talking about? Okay, then when we talk about Egypt, Israelites being slaves in Egypt, which Egypt are we talking about? And when we look at some of these maps, you see that Egypt at some point extended from the Mediterranean Sea all the way up to the shores of Mombasa in Kenya on the Indian Ocean. And then there's maps that will show you that Egypt at some point was half that size. And then the maps that we have today show you that Egypt is much, much smaller than we've seen from other maps. All right? And you can see the current map there in terms of what the size of Egypt is. So when the Bible talks about the Israelites, for example, being in Egypt, or Joseph taking Jesus to Egypt to hide, which Egypt are we talking about? All right? And it's for this reason that I assert that we cannot preach the gospel in the correct context if we don't identify two things that I've said previously. It's the identity of who the chosen people of God are and which one is the promised land. Without identifying these two things, or at least coming to something that is more substantive or more convincing, then we're preaching the gospel out of context. All right? So, which Egypt is the Bible talking about? Which Israel? Which Ethiopia? All right? And many other questions like that. So, you see that map there showing what Ethiopia was. There's another map that shows you a different demographic of Ethiopia. And here it is. So, you see how there's been these shifts. And I believe that some of these shifts have happened because a lot of these people, or let me just say there were a lot of migrations going on. There's been a lot of migrations. So you may find that at some point, maybe the kingdom of Ethiopia, if we can call it that, for argument's sake, it started out as a tiny region and then it grew. And then maybe at some point, maybe because of invasions and wars and things like that, they moved Ethiopia to a different location. Maybe they moved north or moved west or things like that. So those are the kinds of things that seem to have happened in history. And so we've got to find a way of identifying that when the Bible talks about Ethiopia, For example, the most common example I'll use is Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman. Which Ethiopia is it? I believe that if we continue doing these investigations, we can be able to determine those things. All right? So those are the maps that I want you to look at for now. But also, I want us to quickly shift to the map of Israel, because now we get into the conversation or discussion on what is milk and honey. God says, I'm taking you, and he sends spies through Joshua. We know Moses was leading the people. At some point, he died. And then, Joshua takes over. Joshua initially sends two spies to go and spy out the land. Now, you spy not a land. Now, when you look at the map of Israel, all right, 60% of it is desert. The name of that desert is Negev. All right? So now, and then when you compare with the map that's in the Bible, and in this particular case, I'll use the NIV. All right? The NIV. So I'm taking a map from the book. There it is. So that's the map I'm going to use, but I'll put it up for you to just see. Okay? So it's got maps. The NIV's got maps. In fact, almost every Bible has these maps. So these are the maps that we've been given. So and that's the premise of Bible history. So Bible history is based on those maps. In other words, based on that land there that we see in Israel, which today we've been told is the historical Israel or is the ancient Israel. And we're saying, that can't be. Hold on. Let's ask a few questions here. All right. So when you look at that map, it shows you that 60% or a large majority of that piece of land is desert. And so when you look at other maps as well that show you the apportioning of the tribes in terms of their land allocations, it shows you that Simeon and Judah inherited desert. So, and then the fact that 60% of that land is a desert, it means essentially God was giving his children, his precious children, his royal priesthood, the apple of his eye, he was giving them a desert. Don't you find that fascinating? Why would God give Judah or his children a desert? All right. Now, some of the facts to look at is, and I want you to hold that thought for a moment. So some of the things that we need to question here is, okay, so this is the promised land. This is a land that is supposed to really thrive. And thrive there is a lot of things. All right. So my own imagination, I'm thinking, this is a land flowing with milk and honey. It's milk and honey, first of all. But number two, it's flowing. Now, when you look at spiritual interpretations, because like I said, the church has tended to spiritualize all these things. Everything is just spiritual things. So, but I think that these were real things that even now they apply as real things. A promised land for anybody can't be just some spiritual reality somewhere that we really can't get a hold of. It has to be a real thing. The promised land has to be real estate. I've made, a little bit more commentary about that in a different video that you can look at. All right, but for now, I want to focus on what it meant, what milk and honey meant, and flowing. Three aspects there. First of all, it's milk and it's honey, and then it's flowing. So in my understanding, and people who have made spiritual interpretations of these symbolisms or terminologies, if you like, have said milk is a symbol of prosperity and abundance. I think the same applies to honey as well. I don't have time to go into those theological notes and interpretations, but those you can look for yourself. But I think that those of you that have been religious or you've aligned yourself with religion for some time, you know that that's the interpretation that we're given most of the time. We're not given this idea that it's real honey, all right? And I think that it's real honey. I think that it's real milk, and I'll explain why. So when I hear those two terms, I'm thinking, okay, where does honey come from? Where does milk come from? Okay, milk comes from certain animals that we can name. So it would be mostly cows, cattle, and then goats, sheep, camels, water buffaloes. Those are the major five. But there could be other animals that produce milk that human beings can consume and use for other purposes that are suited for humanity, all right? But those are the major five. So if I hear the word milk, I'm thinking this land must have those animals that produce that milk. Don't you think so? It should be. So this land that God is taking these people into must have those animals. It must have those domesticated animals. And domesticated animals are more demanding than animals in the wild because these need to be tended. Hence the idea of people like David being shepherds. See that? Because these animals have to be tended. So in my thinking, this has to be a land that is bustling with life. It's not empty, it's not void. Now, on the contrary, when you look at what this part of Israel is today, it's literally difficult to inhabit. And I'm going to take you to what it is right now. All right? So when you look at pictures right now of what the place looks like, the people that live there. In fact, we've been told that it's inhabited by a people called the Bedouin. All right? Those are the people that have lived there for a very, very long time. And part of the information that I found out on the internet, finding out sources, just from different sources, we're told that even up until now, the government of Israel is still trying to force them out, which to me sounds like it's part of this ongoing conflict of taking over the land, because we know the land was taken from the Palestinians, and that's still ongoing even today. And there's an article right there that you can go and read, and it provides you the source of that information. I believe that's a very reliable source. It's the IPS, the Institute of Palestinian Studies. All right, so they're a very reliable source that provide this information. And the state there that this removal of these people from that land is still ongoing. All right, but when you look at those houses, those are the kinds of houses that you find in there. So it tells you can't really have normal civilization, if I can use that term, in that place. It's difficult to build the right kind of houses. Because if it was, I mean, Israel would have developed that land and put up nice houses and apartments and things like high rises and things like that. But it tells you it's a little bit difficult because you have to have water sources and just different other things. Now, we know that in the desert, there are different things that can grow. There are shrubs and things like that, little trees here and there. And websites actually say that the vegetation in these deserts is sparse. So literally, you have to work hard to find it. All right. So this to me doesn't sound like a place where people like David, as a shepherd, would be taking his sheep to graze. He would literally not live there. It's unlivable to a certain extent. There are certain good things that happen. There are animals that you find there that wander into the desert and things like that. But this is not a place where you expect to find abundance of life in terms of just everything that you expect to see in life, animal life, birds, and things like that. So when we talk about honey, you expect the things that eat honey is things like honey badgers, all right, chimpanzees, bears. Those are the things that love honey. So if there's going to be honey in this land, those animals have to be there somewhere around. So in my thinking, when I hear the promise that this is a land flowing with milk and honey, this has to be a piece of land that has trees, forests, grasslands. It's a green place. If anything, it reminds me of what Abraham was told. Walk through the land, and he was walking through green pastures. Green pastures. And even David himself confirms that. He says, he leads me beside still waters, in green pastures. So David uses that kind of language. Why? Because that's the land that he lives in. And him as a shepherd, what he does for the sheep, or anything else that he was leading, if he had goats, or any other kind of domesticated animals, is the same thing that God did for him. God doesn't lead him in the desert. We know Jesus was led in the desert or in the wilderness to be tested by the devil. It wasn't God. God led Jesus in green pastures and where there's fresh water. And so this is what you expect that God gave these people, the promised land. It couldn't have been desert. And I know you must be thinking about the other tribes and all that. We'll get to that later on. But this is the biggest part of the promised land. It's 60% of the promised land. Why is it desert? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. And this is a very important conversation to have. Because this is how we're going to arrive at the truth. Because remember, one of the things I've said is that there's a lot of common sense lacking. And then the problem with the religion, no matter how you spiritualize it, is that somehow it takes away the people's opportunity to engage in critical thinking. And now a time for critical thinking has come. a time for use of common sense has come. And that's why I'm asking all these questions, because now it's about time we started using our common sense. Like, guys, something here doesn't make sense. See that? And then also, don't forget this. When the spies, there were two spies that came up with the negative report, when Joshua sent them. They said, we are like grasshoppers in their sight. So grasshoppers, there must have been grass there. So this obviously is not a desert. There must have been grass. For those spies to think of themselves as grasshoppers, there must have been grass. So obviously it must be, and remember, the Bible tells us that there were giants in those days. Now, it obviously must be a situation where these people looked at their size in comparison with the people that inhabited the land at the time, and maybe they even hid in grass, and these giants were not able to hide in the grass. So now if you're able to hide in the grass, then obviously you will feel like a grasshopper. You know what I'm saying? Then you look at these human beings, maybe they're as tall as a giraffe. They can't hide in the grass. So hence the saying, we look like grasshoppers, or the conclusion that we look like grasshoppers. Is this making sense? So those are the little things, the nitty-gritties, the little things that we should be thinking about when we are analyzing these issues. It's not just about reading the Bible and reading Bible verses and then just spiritualizing everything. It's way beyond that. Yeah, so now, with regards to the changing of names for the continent of Africa, or the Promised Land, if you like, it has changed names several times. And again, I explained to you that the reason you might see maybe Ethiopia in a slightly different location, or a little bit of a shift, it goes up a little bit and then comes down here and maybe pushes towards the east a little bit, is because of how nomadic the people were in those days. Kingdoms would shift time and again. And again, when I did a presentation on maps, I did mention that sometimes you see maybe Rehoboth appearing twice in places like in the southern part of Africa. The map that we did some 3 weeks ago is because these people were nomadic. So you would imagine that sometimes they'd move. Maybe Rehoboth is up here, and then maybe because of war and conflict, disagreements, they decide to move to a different location and still call it Rehoboth. You see what I'm saying? But also, the issue of changing names, we know that it's something that has been used by our enemies, our friends who came from Europe, to come and just create confusion on the continent, or create confusion on the Promised Land. And they did a lot of name changing, all right, to be able to just make people lose their history, forget their history, if you like. Now, isn't it interesting? I don't know if you know this, but when I looked at the map of Israel, then I was asking myself, okay, fine. It says there in the Bible, scriptures actually describe the Promised Land, or the land of allotment for Simeon and Judah as that area. It literally says the Negev. All right? So then I wonder, say, okay, maybe I'm wrong about this. I guess maybe this is accurate. But then I looked up some things and looked up the name, the old name of Negev. That's not the original name. It was changed. So Negev is a recent name. So at the time that Bible history was taking place, the name of that desert was not Negev. So the possibility here is the Negev that the Bible is talking about is a different location, is a different desert. The old name for Negev is Al-Nakab. That's the name before Negev. So there could have been other names before, but the name that was used before it was called Negev was Al-Nakab. The people that live in that area still refer to themselves as Nakab. They still do. So now, and then also the other piece of information I need to give you is that the Negev desert is 1.8 million years old. So close to 2 million years old. There are other deserts that are older. Sahara and Kalahari are two of them. The Kalahari, I believe, is the oldest. Now, why is this important? Because think about the fact that the children of Israel were taken into the wilderness for 40 years, even though we're told it's Sinai, okay? But even then, Sinai is much smaller than the Kalahari. Sinai might be about maybe 2-3 times bigger than the Negev. And then the Sinai takes about 30 days to walk across. Now, you compare that to the Kalahari or Sahara. So is it possible to walk in the Sinai, which takes 30 days to walk across, is it possible to walk around that wilderness for 40 years and not find your way out of it? Is that possible? Again, we need to use common sense, because religion incapacitates us from engaging critical thinking. Now we are in a time where we're asking serious questions, and critical thinking is extremely important. Is it possible to walk in an area the size of Sinai or Negev that takes 30 days to walk across? Is it possible to walk in there for 40 years without finding a way to get out? Don't you think that wilderness must have been bigger, or the desert must have been much, much, much bigger? And I've just told you, the Kalahari is about 100 times bigger, and the Sahara a lot more. So my conclusion is this wilderness or this desert must have been much bigger than that. It must have been. So all of the things that we can analyze and assess here are working against the idea that that's the promised land and that's where Bible history took place. It keeps looking more and more like, no, that's not it. That's not it. Yeah, so I mean, in conclusion, those are things that we now need to assess and think about and have a conversation over. I mean, the fact that the Negev is 60%, I mean, Israel is 60% desert, for me is very, very interesting. It's very, very interesting. So you now have to think about the fact that Judah, you know, the tribe where Jesus, Solomon, David came from, you know, how exactly did they survive living in this kind of environment? How did David become a shepherd boy? You know what I'm saying? How did his sheep survive? He talks a lot about sheep. So he was a master in dealing with sheep. His life was sheep. So living in the desert, that this is apportioned to him. How did he make his career? What kind of a life did he live? So those are the questions to ask ourselves. You know, how can sheep survive there? How did Solomon have all of those animals? We read about the sacrifices he was making to God, killing all these animals as a sacrifice to God. How? Where? How? He belonged to the tribe of Judah. How did that happen? And then even when Jesus came on the scene himself, you know, we have to look at those details of their lives. And so let me end it there for now. But there's a lot more questions and there's a lot more things to discuss around this subject. But like I said, take a look at your maps in your Bible and send me comments. You're going to see interesting things. And I'd like to hear your comments from what you find out. We probably might do part 2 of this because there's a lot more meat to put on this. But for now, let me leave it here. All right? You have a good day and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.